Today's topic is going to be about StarCraft 2 series order planning and how that relates to CSGO T sides. Because this is how I've been starting to think more and more about how you set up these CSGO T sides. And there's actually a lot of differences because one's a 1v1 game, one's a 5v5 game. But in the general like macro sense, I've started to think of it in a similar regard where like a T side might be the equivalent of like a best of 5 or a best of 7 in StarCraft 2. And the thing about StarCraft 2 series planning is there is no actual guide to do it because there is no actual answer to do it because the variations and the factors are too many to count. It depends on the map, depends on the game, depends on the patch, and finally it depends on the players, their forms, and the meta. Like I said, too many variations. And if there's like some secret information they've been hiding, like some cheese, they can just like keep it in their back pocket and instantly kill somebody. This is famously what Nesty did in his GSL semifinals against Any Pro, where Any Pros only had one build, which was like a Forge opener, but he was doing it in an era where the maps were all had wide open naturals. So Nesty's like, oh, watch Layer Rush, Spine Crawler Rush, something nobody had ever done before. Any Pro broke down like a House Cards, and then the entire series was won in one game, even though it was technically like a best of 5 or a best of 7. I forget which it was. So that's how that particular series plan went. And I guess the best person to think about it is actually Rain, because Rain was, if you watch enough Rain games, you'll realize that there is actually no true build order. And what I mean by that is there's no perfect build order. There's no one answer to everything you will ever face. And this is something Rain truly believed. And among all the players, I guess Rain was arguably like the first or second best to push it that far. And for those who don't know, Rain was arguably one of the greatest Protoss players of all time. I'd argue one of the most influential Protoss players of all time. Like the way he solved PvP in Wings of Liberty, like completely changed that matchup. Like basically like gave everybody a blueprint of how you should play that fucking matchup. And finally, the most important thing, I guess, is the way he was thinking about the game in terms of army composition, in terms of economy, in terms of setup, became like integrated into all Protoss thought, and it's like reverberated throughout the years as like very standard thought, as if like, yeah, this is always how you should have done it. And then no, actually, Rain was the one who like not only, I won't say he was the only one to figure it out. I think you can make arguments for a few other players that also figured it out, but he was the one who popularized it because all pro players, the only guys like they really follow are the ones that are super successful. And Rain was super successful when he did it, so they're like, oh my god, this guy must know something. Let's see what he's doing, right? So that's kind of how I view Rain's career in a nutshell. And the reason I'm going to talk about Rain is because he runs into the greatest series planner StarCraft 2's ever seen, will arguably ever see, and that's MVP. And it was the semifinals of GSL, and MVP, like I consider him the greatest of all time. And one of the reasons for that was because he was such a great thinker of the game, and like he had so many weird like problems he had to deal with that nobody. Like there were circumstances where he was like, where like the disadvantages were so against him that he could have she should have legitimately lost way before he ever got anywhere. But he like kept pulling out these miracles, which is something you have to respect if nothing else. So what MVP did was in this particular series is this. I think Rain and MVP understood each other on like meta game level. For instance, Rain knew he was way better at late game. He knew MVP had a broken spine or something. He had some kind of injuries, right? And he also knew MVP was historically very bad at PvT, was currently very bad at PvT, and his only like real option to beat Rain was arguably an early game cheese. MVP also knew that, and I said this before, but the reason MVP beats Rain is because MVP knows Rain better than Rain knows Rain. So MVP understands Rain's psychological makeup. He understands Rain as a player. He wants to not only be the best, he wants to prove he is the best with the best build. He only needs one build to beat everybody. And there is no such thing as a perfect build in StarCraft 2. It's just like there's no perfect build in CS:GO. Even like a standard default, those all have inherent flaws. Like some of them are obviously like, yeah, you spread out everywhere so you don't get hit, but you're not setting up. But the very fact that you're going into a standard default means you're not taking advantage of the time, because you're running, like the clock is slowly running down. Those are seconds you might need to take over a specific part of the map. Those are seconds that like the other side will figure out. Oh, okay, they're not doing this, they're not doing this, they're not doing this, because they're also pushing out their information. They're also trying to figure out what you're trying to do, and they'll be able to react to that. So like I said, there's no true perfect way to do it. It all depends on like a bunch of different factors. And that was a central problem with Rain, because I feel like Rain was, for all intents and purposes, he was the better player in that series going into it. But MVP understood Rain better than Rain knew Rain, so he devised two strategies that worked one conjunction into the other. So first he played into Rain's idea, where like, okay, I can only do all-ins, let's do that. So the first two games, or it might have been the first three, MVP all-ins a bunch of times, and he does pretty well. I think he like wins one. He wins one of the games, and Rain is like, this motherfucker, this cheesy motherfucker. That's it. I'm gonna go even more all in on my standard build. Like his standard builds are actually pretty safe, generally pretty safe against the early games shenanigans. But he went even harder. It's like, okay, I'm gonna sacrifice even more in my mid game, sacrifice even more in my late game, and I'll make sure MVP has zero chance to win the early game, because I know I could beat him in the late game. Technically, Rain was right, but what Rain didn't realize was, by doing this, he was actually creating another flaw within his own build. And this flaw within his own build is something that nobody could have seen coming, because MVP basically invented a build to take advantage of this flaw. And what he did was he went for a triple CC, like I'd argue like econ cheese, where he basically like runs up against a bunch of money first, and if Rain had done any kind of pressure, any kind of attack, he would have instantly won. But he didn't, because he's Rain. He believes it doesn't matter. Why would I need to do that? Why would I need... Here's what Rain was probably thinking. Rain was probably thinking in his mind, yes, maybe I could have done that. Maybe I could have gone for this, arguably like 50-50. I think it would have been much higher, even given like the complete lack of information MVP had. But he's like, yeah, maybe this is like a 60% chance Rain wins, in Rain's mind. But if I get to the late game, that's a 100% chance. That's what Rain is thinking. And then here's what MVP is thinking. MVP's thinking, Rain's thinking he has a 100% chance to win in the late game. Now he's thinking, because he's doing this super safe build, he also has like a 100% chance to shut down my early game. So he's probably thinking he has this in the bag. What Rain doesn't realize is, because I'm doing this, is because I did the first setup of the all-ins. Now I am allowed to do this build, because that first setup is actually a defense. It's actually a psychological defense, convincing Rain not to attack. It's actually convincing Rain to stay in his base and hold, because Rain has now been convinced MVP can only win in the early game. And so MVP does this build, and the whole point of the build is you max very fast, and then you pull all your CVs, and then you attack. And because of two conflicting factors, Rain has already sacrificed the economy of his own build to be safer in the early game. Second, MVP has cheesed. He's like gotten way more SCVs than normal. He's gotten way more economy than normal. So the differing factors in their overall mechanical ability of managing the economy, like clicking on SCVs, getting the timings right, that's like mitigated somewhat. And so now you have this very specific timing that nobody's ever seen before, where MVP attacks just right before Rain gets his endgame army, where he pulls out SCVs, they tank all the hits, and his army cleans up. And Rain doesn't even realize what's going on. Rain's thinking, that was cheesy. I could have defended that. I just needed a bit more units. Just go a bit faster next time. I'll do it again. MVP wins again. Does it a third time. MVP wins the third time. He wins the entire series. That's how that series goes. And that's kind of what I'm talking about when I'm saying, like, Rain was truly like one of the great Protoss players of all time. But like the only reason he loses that series is because he got tricked. It's like MVP's like mental games, because like MVP, like I said, he knew Rain better than Rain knew Rain. and that's why like MVP is like was such a god back then. And the reason I'm even talking about this now is because in a similar vein, you have to think about how you're controlling your opponent in any CS:GO T side, or all right. So, here's a corollary to Rain. It's not a Protoss player. It's actually Innovation. Innovation is actually very similar to Raid if you just think about it on a meta strategic level, because Innovation is another guy who actually does believe and actually can make it true that if he's allowed to play a standard game, if he's allowed to get to the late game, he will win. Like a vast majority of times, like in both cases, neither of them like could beat Tasia, but like Tasia was like once in a lifetime thing, right? Everybody else they could beat fine in the late game. So ignore Tasia for a moment, and then if they both believe that, but the difference between Innovation and the difference between Rain is that Innovation, at some point, he realizes this important fact: if you cheese, because his like standard game was so strong, it felt like it was like a 90% chance of victory. But if you include a cheese into the early game, just like 1 out of 10 times, maybe even like 1 out of 9, like something even something as minuscule as that, what happens is your standard game becomes that much stronger. It becomes like it goes from like a 9% chance to a 100% chance of victory just because you have created doubt within the enemy's mind. Because you have created doubt within the enemy's mind because they can no longer perfectly predict what you're doing. So they have. And because of the way cheese worked in StarCraft 2, like there are a bunch of ways you can mask it, a bunch of ways you can hide it. So you have to sacrifice some at least some amount of scouting or something if you want, or like even like just a peace of mind if you wanted to get away with like a greedy build against Innovation, even though like the chances of Innovation doing it were pretty slim, generally speaking. Because why would Innovation risk that? But Innovation did risk it a few times, and just even that little amount was enough to like push Innovation over the edge. And this is something Rain didn't learn until much longer into his era. And the reason I'm talking about this is because this is generally what I've watched a bunch of these CS:GO teams, and a lot of them do a similar thing. Like for instance, this is basically Gambit's entire plan, or Gambit under Zeus. Like I'm not talking about Fitch Gambit now. So Gambit's old plan under Zeus was they had this basic idea: you take map control, you choke them out, and then you hit a coordinated attack onto a site at the very end of the round. They did this Overpass. They do this on Cobble. They did this on Train. They're arguably the 3 best maps, I think. And what would happen is they would do this, right? But they would also do the execute every once in a while, just throw it in, maybe a rush or something. And the reason you include that is so that you never allow the enemy to have a peace of mind of what you're trying to do. And the very fact that you're mixing it up is what's preventing them from like fully committing to one type of defense or another. And it's always like it's forcing more mental resources being spent thinking about what the other enemy is trying to do. Even though like Zeus like famously did, if you just, I'm not sure if there's a statistic for it, but if you just look overall, I'd argue it's probably going to be like maybe 10% times. Like it was something really low. Like it was like 10% times, 20% times he's actually pulled out like an execute compared to like the other times like run a bunch of these standard like hits he's setting up instead. But just the fact he's doing that is very very important to what he was. It made the first part of his strategy stronger than it already was. And I'd argue Astralis is a similar case where because their B execute on Overpass is so strong, it forces the entire enemy team to focus more on that. So you see a bunch of teams like they just like stack B early or they loosen up like their A defense because of it. And because of that, like what happens is Astralis is also very, very good, arguably the best at taking control of those areas, clearing them out, and then hitting the A side or switching back to B. So it was always like this very complicated puzzle that teams had to solve if they wanted to beat Astralis on Overpass. And Gambit did beat Astralis, but they didn't do it because they were strategically better. They did it because Mo kept winning a bunch of retakes, which is a bit of a different like conundrum. a bit different conundrum for Astralis because they couldn't figure out how to stop Mo from winning those retakes, because that's gonna happen sometimes in CS:GO where like one guy's skill outdoes everything you've done like strategically on the map or tactically on the map, and that's kind of leads to my next point where like sometimes there's going to be series where how do I explain this? Okay, so there are series where in 2014 there was the best rivalry in StarCraft 2 during that period was Sue versus Zest. Zest was the best Protoss player in the world at that time. He felt like Neo Rain almost, in that he had the best builds, best execution. He understood the mid game and late game better, but unlike Rain, he had like he wasn't focused on PvT so much as he was more focused on PvZ, because like Terrans weren't that good at that era. You could argue there's a few arguments to be made as to whether it was because of the patch or whether it was because of the Terrans themselves. Just because like they weren't playing the correct style, but like that's like the argument David Kim says, like, why don't you guys play more like Tasia? And Tasia's like, what are you talking about? Like, nobody can play like me. Same thing with Maru. Like the best Terran players during that period were like players who were like so far beyond the rest, like it didn't seem feasible for even like top pros to catch up to like greatest of all time type pros like Innovation, Maru, Tasia. Like it seems weird, but basically that's kind of who Zest was, like this super dominant Protoss player, and Sue was the second best player. Obviously he's always the second best player any era he's in, it feels like. So they played twice, and Sue should have won that GSL finals, but he lost. And then they played in, I think it was a Kespa Cup semifinals, and then Zest like completely demolished him there because he finally figured out all of like Sue's tactics, Sue's build orders, Sue's strategies. And so you go into the final GSL of the year. They play. This is the one that made me truly think Sue was a fucking legend. It was the GSL semifinals, like season 3, I think. And in this one, Sue does this thing where he throws his own playbook out the fucking window, and he does all these crazy fucking builds because he realizes that his normal game plan is beaten on every single front by Zest. So he has to completely change the game, change the order, change everything he's ever done in order to win. And then he does that, and then he wins. And the reason I'm bringing this up is because I've seen like this kind of parallel for some of the great like in-game leaders of CS:GO, where they've run into this situation where they realize something is wrong, and they can either do one or two things. They can either grind it out like Zeus. Like Zeus famously did this against Astralis, where he's like, okay, so I want you to run this, when you run this, get me information here, get me information there, and then he does that, and then like he yells at his team, like famously, like he yells at his team for like those 2 rounds where he's like, shut the fuck up, follow me or die trying, throw the fucking nades outside, SK with the SK execute, and that's what's gonna fucking kill him, right? And that's how they won that. I was like, wow, how they won that semifinals. That's what eventually helped them win the major. Or like MSL did it against I think it was like G2, where like basically what happened was he was running a bunch of different tactics, but all of them were done to find out what was the basic setup of what G2 was doing. At the very end, it was like round 29, might have been round 30 actually, where he's like, okay, here's what G2 is doing. G2 is doing like a 2-1-2 or something, and basically what we need to do is we need to throw these smokes, these flash. Actually, what smokes is we need to throw these flashes in this way. We need 3 people to run forward on that long and to kill everybody, and then we'll be in a 5v3. Go run down A, we'll win. Like that's it, and that's what he did. That's how he won, because he sacrificed a bunch of rounds to get that information to create the perfect counter plan to beat G2. I think it was I'm pretty sure it's G2. But here's what happens when you don't have that many rounds to work with, is you have to realize strategically or tactically like how you're getting beaten, what's beating you. So this happened in Astralis versus SK at the Krakow Major on Cash. So what was happening was Astralis actually running really good T sides. They were getting mid control, and then they were hitting the sites. They're winning those duels. But what happened at the very end of that match was SK started pulling off a bunch of like ridiculous hero plays where they were winning all the retakes. And then not Karen, Glaive calls a pause, and Glaive, and then you see Glaive like pause there. He's like talking to his teammates about what they're going to do, and then for the final round of that game, or like not the final round, but like the tactic they eventually decide to call is they decide, okay, so if you think about it from like a meta level, what's happening is SKs just focusing on wing defense, and then even so, what happens is either they win that initial hit defense, where like they either stop the hit or like do enough damage that the retake wins, and that was generally what was happening. So what they ended up doing is they did what Charlotte did, was like, okay, so what we need to do is we need to not only win the take, we need to nullify their ability to retake us. So what they did was after they had mid control, they snuck Kirby into middle, and they had 2 fake one site, and then two go break into the other site, and then when the two did that, they easily took the site. I think it was B they took, and then they planted the bomb. The guys at A kept running distraction, kept trying to kill them, kept trying to stall them. Eventually they got wiped out, but Kirby in the middle like kills the retake before it even happens, because he's like intercepting them. They have to take care of him, but they can't do it, and that's how Charlotte wins that game. And the reason I'm bringing this up is because that's how I've come to think about it. Is because of the way the T sides work. You're actually examining a bunch of like StarCraft 2. You're examining a bunch of your own strengths, your own weaknesses in this current game right now. And in the current in the games before, like the history before of your own games, and then your enemies' games, and then you're taking all that information and you're combining it with like the information of your economy, the nades, what weapons you have, what players are on form, stuff, all this stuff into this one area, and then you're creating the game plan to figure out what the one way to beat your opponent. And that's kind of how I've started to think about it. As you can't really think about like a T side as even like half a game. It actually feels more like it's like a best of 5 or like a best of 7 in of itself, in terms of what's being adapted, what's being changed all the time throughout both sides of the half. And so I guess finally I'll talk about the differences, because like I said, this is only a model. It's not actually perfectly analogous. For CSGO, for instance, like I said earlier, it's a 5v5 game, so you can't macro everyone. And like that, this is like an underrated concept about a 5v5 game versus 1v1 game, is the fact that in a 1v1 game, like the leader is also like the star player, is also support players, also all this crap. Like that's basically what it is in StarCraft 2. You have to figure out everything else by yourself. But the difference is that, like in a StarCraft 2 best of 5, when the game's over, your coach or your friend, like somebody, will have gotten to see the game from like the spectator point of view. And if you know StarCraft 2, you know like the UI is such that you can see all the production. You can see what the other guy's doing throughout the entire thing. So you get close to like, I'd argue you get like 95% of the information out of like a single game. If you were in the game playing in between like game 1, game 2, right? And whereas in CSGO, because it's a T side half, you're actually not getting that much information from a leader perspective. You're getting the information from your teammates, but like if the comms aren't good, then that's not helpful. You're not really getting information about like what the enemy was doing on rounds where you don't meet them, like what their setups were or anything like that. Like if you decide for instance do like a B execute, you don't know exactly what setup they were doing on A, or like maybe it was like a super cheesy setup or something like that, where a super gimmicky setup that's like a one-way smoke, but you don't know because nobody was there to see it, and your coach can't see it either. So that's another thing. And finally, the difference is like the consistency of the pieces, like the player form is an important thing to think about in CSGO, and that's kind of how you want to play towards it. Like because most CSGO teams now have like 2 or 3 stars you can play around, so you kind of figure out what those guys are good at, what the roles are, what tactics revolve around them. You play towards that. Whereas in StarCraft 2, it's pretty obvious because you're the one playing what's getting fucked up. So these are just some basic thoughts. it can go deeper. It can go much deeper than that. Like I didn't even go into like the Squirtle Flex pick stuff, but maybe I'll do that for another time. See you later.